Hello, and welcome to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Cazoo, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters across the car retailing sector, from factory to forecourt.
Hello and welcome to this special Motor Trade Radio weekday podcast interview. Today we're delighted to be joined by Felipe Munoz, respected automotive industry analyst and speaker. Felipe's research on global car industry trends is shared on a regular basis on LinkedIn, providing a reliable source of unique insight on the auto industry across Europe, Asia, and the US. He also posts regular blogs on his car industry analysis newsletter. Links to both pages are in this episode's show notes. Philip and I are both big fans, so we do recommend you follow Philippe. Philip joins us today to share his views, insight and research on Chinese car makers, covering established players, new entrants, and brands heading to Europe over the course of the next 24 months or so. So welcome back to the pod, Philippe. I can't believe it's actually over a year since we last had you on the show. So welcome back.
Well, thank you very much, Curtis and Philip. Yes, it's been a long time already since our last conversation. Time flies, but it's always good to catch up and talk to you about what's going on in this fascinating industry.
And in your world as well, Philippe, been that out in since we last spoke as well.
I know many things have changed. I'm now trying to do my own stuff, my own business as a consultant, as a speaker, analyst, which is my passion and is what it has taken me to many places, just following the industry trends.
Yeah, the automotive industry certainly keeps you busy with everything going on.
Very much. It's changing all the time, and now we have one crisis after the other one, new challenges, new technologies, new players. So every day there is something to tell. Yeah,
exactly. Cool. What Curtis said. I mean, I follow a lot of what you push out there, and I mean, I'm privileged that chair of the VRA. I've also got you involved with our summit this year in November. So I'm the honour of you coming over to the UK and being a fireside chat guest with me at the forthcoming VRA summit down in Warwick in November. So really looking forward to you in person. I mean, we've spoke a few times, obviously, over the phone, but never actually met. So I'm really looking forward to that. So it's an absolute honour to have you back on and a pleasure to be speaking to you. And so let's start off with some of the the research you've been publishing recently and tracking some of the challenges and issues facing Chinese car makers in their sort of domestic market and the sales progress many of them are making in the export markets. Do you want to talk us through some of this analysis and research that you've been looking at?
Well, yeah. As many of you know, the hot topic in the industry, especially in Europe, is how fast the Chinese car makers are gaining traction. This is not only happening in Europe; it's basically everywhere where they are allowed to sell their cars, because they are very competitive, and their cars are, in many cases, they are even in a better position regarding quality than many traditional car makers that we know. So I've been trying to follow this new trend, how fast they are growing, how fast they are gaining traction, and in Europe is not the exception. Even if it is a quite competitive market with a lot of regulation and with very strong players which want to protect their position. Well, the Chinese are appealing to the public, and their cars, you start to see them, and not only a specific market, but I would say everywhere in Europe. And the numbers and the figures are confirm that we are seeing a big growth from the Chinese brands, and in many cases at the expense, of course, of the traditional brands, because we have to remember that Europe is not a market. It's a mature market, so it doesn't grow anymore. It has lost actually around 2 million units of sales per year between the pre-pandemic 2019 and today. So the market is more or less 2 million units smaller, but the competition is bigger and is getting tougher. So it's nice to see the progress, but it's also, let's say, frightening for the world of cars as we know it, because it's changing very fast, and we don't know what we're gonna see in the coming years.
And Philippe, staying with Europe, with the UK sitting outside of the EU now, how much more attractive is the UK market for Chinese brands looking for fast growth and coming into Europe?
Look, it is very attractive, and I would say the most attractive market for the Chinese car makers right now in Europe, because it's not part of the EU, so it doesn't have to follow the trade rules imposed by the European Commission. So making of the UK, let's say, a more open market to imports. And actually, you can see those position in the figures. The UK is now the biggest market for Chinese car brands in Europe, ahead of Germany, and not only in terms of volume but also in terms of market share. And this is the consequence of less restrictions, a consumer base that is more open to new brands. The UK, unlike Germany and France, its car industry is less. Its local car industry is less big and less powerful. So it's easier for new entries to gain traction. And this is exactly what is going on in the UK. During the first half of this year, the Chinese car makers, the Chinese car brands, which this is important to clarify here, because one thing is a Chinese car brand and a different thing is a Chinese car, because there are many cars produced by traditional car makers in China and exported to the world. When I talk about the Chinese car brands, I exclude those. So I'm excluding, for example, the Tesla Model 3 coming from China. I don't include it as a Chinese brand. So the numbers for the Chinese car brands show that they already have more than 15% market share in the UK, which is one of the highest in Europe. I would say the highest. It's more than what you see in Spain or Italy, where they have also gained a lot of traction. So yes, the UK is the most appealing market for them right now in Europe.
And staying with that, do you see the UK being used by the Chinese brands as a blueprint for how they launch into other European markets?
Yes, I think as I said before, the attractiveness of the UK is making, or let's say, is forcing many Chinese car makers to try the UK first and then expand to the rest of the continent. Of course, we have always seen the opposite. We usually see the new cars being introduced in Europe before the UK. But with the Chinese, this might be changing because it's easier for them. It is, let's say, it's still the second car market in Europe behind Germany, so it's quite representative. And I think it's gonna gain even more protagonism within the next years.
And I mean, on that, I mean, of all the new entrants brands that they've launched in recent years, and we can talk about one or two of those, but which are the ones that stand out for you as an industry watcher, and why? I mean, because obviously we've got the BYDs, we've got the JQs, the Motor, Chery now alongside that as the parent company, and Lepus now alongside that. But there's others that are earmarked in the UK and Europe. What for anybody listening, what should the industry be watching for, and why?
Mhm. Well, there are many Chinese car makers, and ones you get in Europe are just a small part of them. There are many others that have not even tried to go abroad because they are now concentrated in China. But the long-term goal of most of them is, of course, to expand their business. So in Europe, as I said, so far the big game changers have been BYD, Chico and Omoda, and MG. We have to remember MG was the first one, and consider MG as a Chinese brand. Is even though it has a British heritage, it's right now is fully Chinese, right? So in addition to these ones, I think the upcoming wave of Chinese car brands is going to include Geely and Chang'an. Geely is now based on Q1 results, it was the largest Chinese car maker ahead of BYD for the first time. But it took quite a lot to expand its presence outside China, because it is the owner of other already Western car brands, right? So Volvo, for example. So they took their time, but now they are accelerating their plans. So Geely, I think, is going to be a new game changer in the coming months. It's already doing expanding its presence. And Chang'an is also a big group from China. If it's properly remember, I think it's the third largest by volume in China, or the fourth behind Chery. They are very close. But Chang'an has also taken its time to explore the European market. They have very competitive products. Deepa is one of them, one of their brands. And so they could eventually change everything. If we go farther down the ranking in terms of volume from China, there are other car makers that have not arrived yet. I think they are going to also change everything. Xiaomi is the first one. Xiaomi has made a revolution, let's say, in China. It has become like the Tesla in China. It's very popular there. It's only two cars right now are very popular. The Xiaomi SU7 and YU7. They just introduced a massive SUV for the Chinese market. I don't see a potential for that car outside China. But regarding the first two, the SU7 and YU7, I think they can do a lot of things in Europe, as Tesla did 10 years ago. We have to remember also the UK was a good example of this. The UK was one of the biggest markets for Tesla at the beginning. It was a market where it grew the fastest. So I think it's going to be also the case for Xiaomi whenever they decide to officially introduce the brand in Europe. And the UK, of course, is going to be a key market for them. The other one that might have also some potential is Li Auto or Li Xiang, which is so far focused or specialized on big SUVs with extended range engines. Their SUVs are quite appealing, very modern, very interesting in terms of comfort and tech solutions. And I think as an SUV brand, it also has some potential outside China. So let's see. But as I said, the Chinese car market is always bringing news. Not only good ones, because actually there are some car makers from China that are also struggling there. So we will probably won't see them all in the outside China, but it's let's say it's changing the global market every day.
Yeah, so I think, as you say there, I think we think about these brands and Geely being one of them, and obviously they're just the parent behind obviously many brands that taking market share both in the UK and Europe, and obviously, the same with Chery and their multi-brands that they operate above. And as you say, with Shanghai, I think people see Shanghai as a fairly new entrant, but as you say, it's a big business outside of the UK, and they've been operating in the UK as a research and development for many years. So I think, but is this going to, obviously, a lot of this is taking market share from, let's say, the more established brands. I don't like to call them legacy brands quite yet. But, you've got things like Great Wall Motors, GWM, they've seen a very slow burn here in the UK. With just 144 cars sold in the first half of 2026. Are you seeing similar in other markets that some of these brands are just not making the traction, like some of the brands you just mentioned before?
Well, yeah, the case of Great Wall is interesting because they were in Europe, in some European markets 20 years ago. And they were exploring. They had some interesting, good presence in Bulgaria or Eastern Europe. But then they changed everything. They've been trying to also to catch up in China. Great Wall Motors is a car maker that sells around 1.2, 1.3 million units per year, which means that it's not part of the big ones from China, but it's not a small one either. The thing is that it has focused its strategy in China on petrol engines, or in the best of the cases, hybrids, leaving very, very few space to the fully electric vehicles. Actually, the only brand it has right now which produces fully electric cars is Ora, which has been also in Europe for some years and in the UK as well. But the car that we saw from Great Wall Motors, particularly the Ora Funky Car, I think it was the name yesterday, but yeah, fully electric, but it arrived, I would say, not in the right time, and with a quite expensive price, with a high price, and so it was not, in my opinion, it wasn't the best way to open or to create a market for your cars. So this order didn't work, let's say like that. It was a big flop. Now the company is trying to reposition itself in Europe and learn from these mistakes with the introduction of the new Ora 5, which is very similar to, let's say, to Funky Cat, but it's more of a crossover SUV, bigger, with the difference with hybrid engines, plug-in hybrid engines, or even petrol, not only electric. So this is allowing these brands to increase their presence not only in the electric, because not only depend on one powertrain to go on, especially when you're targeted by the European Commission with your electric cars, right? So they learn from these mistakes, and I think that eventually they will have a good, or let's say a respectable market share in the region.
So it sounds like then that we shouldn't underestimate some of these new entrants' ability to, re-engineer what they came in with. Like I say, the GWM, the Funky Cat, came in fairly early with a fully electric, not the greatest looking of vehicles could be expected. Like you say, the UK, I think it was closer to £40,000 sterling. So, it came in at a quite high ticket price at a market that wasn't quite ready for it yet. But it sounds like what you're saying is that don't underestimate these Chinese manufacturers, that they are prepared to, engineer what they do, react to the market and start again. Which is interesting, that because I think some people are trying to write off some of these new entrants that they're not getting the traction, but it doesn't sound like that's what they'll do.
Yeah, look, this one of the things that we've learned so far from the Chinese makers is the speed at which they not only develop their product, but the way at which they react to market changes. Just one example, in October last year, the EU Commission imposed a tariff on electric vehicles being imported from China, and everybody was saying, "Oh, okay, so this is probably going to be a big impact on their sales." Well, look, what they did the best was, okay, so we're going to control all their powertrains. And that's how they started to introduce the fully hybrids. And G is very good at them. Plug-in hybrids, Omoda, Jayco are one example. And some of them, they are starting to explore the extended range vehicles such as Leapmotor. So the Chinese car makers is not only about electric cars. They have plenty of powertrains and with products wherever they explore. Of course, the Chinese are not as competitive as the Westerns when it's about combustion engine cars, but still there are good examples of interesting petrol or diesel cars from China. But the focus is on electrified vehicles, what they call the new energy vehicles, which is not only electric cars. So the case of Great Wall or MG when it reacted to the tariffs is quite representative, because they are showing us that speed is a key element here, and it's something that unfortunately neither the European nor the Americans have, which is the speed. They don't have that. They take their time, and this is becoming a big problem for them.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think the one that you say, they're very quick at reacting and changing course and redeveloping. Well, we'll be back after this short break with more from Philippe.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Cazoo.
Welcome back. We're talking to leading industry analyst Felipe Munoz on this special weekday episode. Now, Felipe, there's been a number of recent reports. We've covered these on the podcast about some Chinese brands setting up production in Europe through joint ventures with established car makers, looking like, at the moment, the most likely scenario. So, yeah, we've reported on Geely with potentially Ford in Valencia, Leapmotor with Stellantis, its joint venture partner, Chery with Nissan, and or even Jaguar Land Rover in the UK. Which do you think are the most likely to happen, and when?
Well, they're already happening things. The best example is Leapmotor with Stellantis. Stellantis and Leapmotor, they created this joint venture for whatever Leapmotor sells outside China. So there is a 50-50 there, or 51-49, I think, from 51 Stellantis, where basically Stellantis is in charge of all the sales and eventual production of Leapmotors out of China. It is going to start anytime soon in Spain. Some of one of its products. I think it's the B10, which is the small SUV. And it's paying off, because Leapmotors is taking off in Europe. It's selling quite a lot in Italy, and it's gaining traction in other markets such as the UK as well. That's one example, but there are others that are already taking place. For example, Chery with Nissan. Chery, I think, bought one of the plants Nissan had in Spain, and it's already producing or assembling, let's say, some of its model under traditional Spanish brands, Ebro and Santana. The upcoming announcements are from Dongfeng and Stellantis to use some of their plants in France. That's going to take place as well, because these plants need to be revamped. They need to use this. They need to make these plants productive again. It's not happening, and it's becoming a national problem, because the traditional car makers cannot, or let's say it's very difficult for them to fire people and close plants. So basically, at the moment, the only solution they have is to let's bring some partners from China and open the factories for them. But as you said, there are more orders. I've heard about Cherry as well in I don't know if it's UK or somewhere in Europe. So far, the only exception has been Volkswagen. It seems that they are happy with the collaboration they have right now in China, but they don't intend, at least for now, to use their factories for their Chinese partners. Let's see. But this is changing all the time, and the pressure, the market conditions are getting worse for them. So eventually, I think all of them are going to make use of this solution.
So, as you say, I think some of the more established manufacturers, brands are honestly struggling with production utilization. Chinese manufacturers, they're quite asset light, aren't they? They don't like to just build a factory if they can obviously go in as a JV or take over an existing, because I say it's quite expensive to shut down a factory into. I believe is it more expensive, more costly to shut a factory than it is actually to build one in some cases for the established brands. So as you say, there's a lot going on there.
Indeed. The thing is that at the same time, well, what they are doing is open their markets to the competition. So it is, let's say, a solution in the short term. Yes, they get rid of these headaches of these plants. In the long term, well, they are just bringing more competition to their own markets and locally producing in their own markets. So I'm not sure how good this is going to be for them. It's good for the entire economy, of course, because those car makers coming from China are going to employ people and they're going to keep these factories busy. But in the long term, the traditional ones are going to keep losing market share.
Yeah, and probably final question. We'll get your crystal ball out here, Philippe. What's your forecast on how the new car market in Europe will look by the end of the decade? And probably as a follow up with that is how much growth is achievable by the Chinese brands, and how successful will the established brands be in protecting market share, especially against those European manufacturers?
That's the big question. I think what we're gonna see is further expansion of the Chinese. Right now, we are seeing, even with the barriers to trade, the regulation and everything, they already have around 9% of the market by H1 2026. And as I said, not all of these brands are already in Europe. So it's just, let's say, it's the start of this story. And once they start producing locally or assembling locally, you should even further market share, a bigger market share. So I think this decade we will see a more, how do you say, divided or market in terms of players. We won't see the usual ones leading with a lot of gap between them and the other guys. We should expect not to see Volkswagen, Stellantis, and Renault just being the usual leaders in all segments, but we will see a further atomization of the market because of the Chinese. It is already happening in other markets. As I said, Europe is one of them. This is not where they have the largest presence. If you go to Latin America, they already have double-digit market share, and they are having a big impact on markets and the car makers that have been operating them there for many years. Southeast Asia, the same. So I think Europe is going to head towards the same direction. Of course, it will all depend on regulation, trade wars, and all of that. But if these guys, if the Chinese decide to locally produce in Europe, well, it's going to be hard for them to kick them out. So I think what we will see by 2030 is more atomized. Do you say like that? Markets in Europe, yeah.
it is going to be very, like you say, I think for the market to understand what is on the horizon, like you say, look at Latin America, South America, Asia, that see the penetration, the volume that they're getting in there. And as you say, as they start to get into these joint ventures and co-production, that bypasses that some of the challenges of tariffs, import, etc. Doesn't it? That and as you say, becomes a little bit more very difficult to get them out once they're bedded in, and they're part of the employment within their markets, which will be interesting. As always, Philippe, when we chat about this kind of thing for hours and hours, and you and I certainly gets one. So I think, for me, Curtis and I say at the start, it's great to have you back on. I think we should do it more often. I think it would be great to get your view on what's happening outside of the UK and at that higher level of more strategic from it. I think one thing for listeners that, as you say, very prolific in terms of social media. Those that don't follow you on LinkedIn, they are missing out. Curtis and I do, and I know a lot of people that do follow what you put out into the market. The other thing I would say is that, so to anybody listening to this podcast today, Philippe does a great newsletter that he does circulate to those wanting to be on the distribution list outside of what Philippe puts on LinkedIn. One has arrived this week, so it's the Shift Ahead for August 2026, and he's looking at the Stellantis bet on Leap Motors, BEV sales in 66 markets, the pickup marginal sales in Europe, and other things, and always a fascinating read. So on that, Philippe, if somebody wants to be added to that, can they just try and reach out to you through LinkedIn?
Well, yes, there are many ways. Yeah, the easiest one is through my email, felipe.p.munoz@outlook.com, or to follow me on my social media platforms, Car Industry Analysis, and I always try to respond to the messages, and of course share the content with whoever is interested. Yeah.
And as Curtis said at the start, we'll add contact details, etc., to the
Sorry.
notes as well to everybody listening to this podcast.
Thank you.
Well, Philippe, many thanks for joining us. Unfortunately, that is all we've got time for now. So we hope you've enjoyed this weekday special. Many thanks again to Philippe for joining us for today's pod. And Philippe, the door is open. You're welcome back anytime. But we're back with the headlines on Saturday. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Cazoo.